How's that?
Yep, I can see your slides now.
Great. So I can't see you, so you'll have to chime in when I get to time.
Okay, it's 10:55 now, 10:56.
Yeah, I'm starting my stopwatch on my phone, so hopefully that'll help me remember. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Welcome to a live broadcast from my kids' closet. Very happy to be sharing this work that is co-authored with Sam, our session organizer. So this is on inequality, information failures, and air pollution. And we'll start with a basic fact that you all probably already know, which is that pollution exposure is disproportionately experienced by low-income communities and people of color. And this is a stylized fact that's been known for a long time, obviously known by those communities themselves, but also shown statistically by lots of researchers from different disciplines. And there's been really extensive research from a wide range of academic disciplines on this fact, on showing how it plays out and on hypothesizing and trying to work through why this is. It's not just an academic question, but it's the foundation of the environmental justice movement in the US. On the right, you have a picture from Detroit, Michigan, where this is very much an issue that shows up in activist communities and in policymaking communities. Within environmental economics, researchers have generally focused, we would say almost solely, on the role of income inequality. And you hear this referred to as coming to the nuisance or moving to the nuisance. And the basic idea is just that low-income people have to make really difficult decisions about trading off what they can afford to buy. And so, if they can't afford to buy a house in a clean area because they're deciding to use their money on healthcare or food, then they're going to end up in polluted communities. And the policy implications of this moving to the nuisance story are generally taken to mean in environmental economics that there isn't an environmental failure here per se. There's an income inequality failure. And so the role of the policymaker is either to do nothing if they don't support income redistribution, or to redistribute income, as opposed to a role for environmental regulations. Other causes besides moving to the nuisance have been discussed. Potentially firms discriminate, even intentionally, and they deliberately decide where to pollute more. Maybe regulators discriminate either in citing decisions or in choosing where to put their enforcement efforts. Or maybe firms just go where it's cheapest. So when they're deciding where to put a new facility, they go where land is cheapest, and that happens to be where low-income people are. Or maybe they decide to go where it's cheapest in terms of the least amount of opposition that they're going to face. So these other explanations have been explored somewhat in the econ literature, again, but they haven't been the focus. What we focus on in our paper is a new mechanism that we think is really important and that hasn't been explored nearly as much. And it's the role of information. And it's not to invalidate the other causes I talked about on the previous slide. If anything, we think that the role of information is going to be to interact with and amplify the causes on the previous slide. So we start out with descriptive quantitative evidence to show a couple of key points. And then these are going to be used to structure our theoretical section. So first, we show a lot of reasons why we think people are not perfectly informed about pollution and its negative effects. I'll give you some of those in a minute. Next, we show that as a society and as individuals, we tend to underestimate pollution and its damages rather than the other way around. And we can talk through what overestimation would mean, but we're going to focus on underestimation. And then third, pollution is co-located with more salient disamenities. So you might not know about particulate matter from highways, but you don't like the noise away, or you think that it doesn't make for a nice view. After we go through that descriptive quantitative evidence, we show a theoretical model of housing choices in this limited information environment using the stylized facts coming out of our descriptive evidence. So this is too much text. It's meant to overwhelm you with the number of reasons why people are not perfectly informed about pollution and why, in particular, underestimation is going to be more common. So we go through all of these in detail in the paper. Right now, I'll just highlight a few. One example, we tend to discover new biological pathways rather than ruling out previously believed ones. So maybe we used to know that bad air quality was bad for asthma, and then we find out, well, it's also bad for cardiovascular health and for dementia. One example. That's the first one here. What else do I want to highlight given my limited time? Third one, data on ambient concentrations are pretty limited. If you've worked with environmental monitoring data, you know that it doesn't cover all counties, doesn't cover all pollutants, and it doesn't cover all time periods. Researchers in this area don't have perfect information, so we can't expect the public to have better information. Fourth one, companies sometimes hide emissions. And so you find out after the fact that they were releasing more toxics than what you knew about, for instance. Towards the bottom, what we have are some sort of behavioral explanations that come out of the psychology literature. People might focus on pollution that's visible or smelly and might not know about all sources of pollution. People tend to know about some, but not all biological pathways. And researchers have documented a halo of optimism. So I know that pollution is bad, but my neighborhood is great. And, everybody sort of believes that. So here's a sketch of what that's going to imply for our model. If everybody is underinformed, and a key feature of our model is that everybody is going to be underestimating pollution in the same ways. So it's not that some people have better information than others or are better educated or anything like that. Instead, what's going to matter is how pollution dissipates. So picture on the left, a refinery that's putting out toxic emissions. And then there are 3 homes. The blue one is located close to the refinery. The white one is a bit further away, and then the yellow one is quite far away. The way that pollution dissipates means that there's going to be high levels of pollutants right at the refinery, and then it's going to fall off. And what scientists have shown is that it generally follows off in something approximating an exponential form. And so, the slope flattens out as you get further away. What that means is if people think, so since I can't point, but I can hover, if people think that pollution concentrations are at this dashed line, but they're actually at this gray line, then the difference between what people think and what is actually holding in the atmosphere is going to be bigger right next to the refinery. So this blue household is going to experience a big wedge between what they think is true and what is actually true. By the time you get out to the yellow household, that's not true because enough of the pollution has sort of dissipated that the difference between truth and beliefs is not that big. And that's going to be what drives our results. We implement it in the paper by flipping it. So the previous slide was for concentrations. Now we have air quality, which is just the negative of concentrations. And we linearize it for tractability so we can show you closed form solutions. And so people are going to sort according to what they believe, perceived air quality, this dashed line. And then they're experiencing true air quality, this gray line. And so low-income households are going to believe that they're selecting point A. Land is cheap next to the refinery, and they're willing to make the trade-off of worse air quality as a result. Whereas high-income households are going to choose to live at sea, farther away, because they have the monetary resources to buy land far away from the refinery. What that means with limited information is that the low-income household is actually going to experience air quality B, whereas the high-income household is actually going to experience air quality D. And so because of the way pollution dissipates and because everybody is underestimating pollution, the low-income household experiences this big difference between truth and perceptions. And again, that's not because of differences in information or differences in education. It's just because of pollution dissipation combined with differences in income. So we formalize it as a model of household behavior where consumers get utility from healthiness, which is unobservable, but households use distance to point sources as a proxy, and then utility from everything else. We make a bunch of simplifying assumptions so that we can have closed form solutions. So we have Cobb-Douglas utility, linear exogenous house prices, and linear pollution dissipation. We're going to relax all three of these in extensions of the model, but this is what we start with. And what we can show with closed form solutions is that low-income households experience more pollution. That's just because air quality is a normal good. That's what's been documented in the literature before. The two novel things are, first, that low-income households experience more hidden pollution because of pollution dissipation. And then we work through the welfare implications of that. And we think through where low-income households would have chosen to locate if they had known the true pollution function. And low-income households typically are going to experience greater utility loss from this lack of information. And the basic idea is just that the marginal value of air quality is high at low levels. So they're experiencing a greater wedge between what's true and what they believe, and there's a bigger marginal value of that. We go through a bunch of extensions. We allow housing prices to be endogenous in a pure exchange economy, and we continue to have that low-income households experience the greatest deadweight loss. And the idea there is that when everybody's uninformed, the price gradient is too flat, and this disproportionately helps high-income households that purchase a lot of distance. Then we go through another modeling extension where we relax functional forms and use fewer assumptions in the theory. And this second extension is going to incorporate the co-located disamenities that I referred to earlier, like noise and ugly views. What you have at the bottom of the slide here is just simple correlations of NO2, common air pollutant, with high-intensity development of land use on the left-hand side, or with noise on the right-hand side, to give you what I think is intuitive, which is that these are all very highly correlated. So what that correlation means is that even if households know nothing about pollution, they might sort based on noise and then experience those disproportionate pollution effects as a result of that. We go through extensions to other topics in some qualitative discussion. You could imagine these same mechanisms being really relevant for climate justice. If we continue to find out that climate change is worse than we thought, and that it hits low-income countries the hardest. You could extend these ideas to racism in the housing market. So everything I've talked about so far is about differences in income. But if there's racism in the housing market that causes people to sort, then you could have the same correlations with hidden pollution as a result of that. And then we talk through implications for revealed preference studies. So it's very common in environmental economics to use people's revealed preferences to estimate willingness to pay for environmental quality. And we show how this could be biased in either direction in this kind of low information environment. Just to wrap up, a lot again of the, this is a new area. Okay, just to wrap up, one thing that we want to highlight about this paper is that there is a growing literature in economics in general on information. This is showing up in education and labor and lots of different fields. And a lot of that literature is focusing on heterogeneity in information costs, showing different levels of access to information across different demographic groups. And what we think is really novel and important is that inequalities can arise even if there's uniform information, because of the way that information interacts with other things going on in the marketplace. Last concluding thought, When we came to this paper, it was very clear to us that economists and advocates have been approaching questions of environmental justice from very different viewpoints. And the two groups don't always communicate super well together. We think in part this is because environmental justice advocates focus on the very things that econ models assume away, like imperfect information. That just doesn't show up in a lot of our standard models, but that's what's motivating environmental justice work. So something like imperfect information is going to interact with the standard stories we tell in economics, like coming to the nuisance. And it's not going to invalidate that, but it's going to complicate the way that we interpret things like sorting behavior.
Okay, Catie, thank you so much. I can't really give you an unbiased opinion on whether that paper was really cool because I helped you write it. But thank you for presenting on our behalf. It is 11:11 a.m. The session is slated to end at 11:25. The next session starts at 11:30. I think we should move on to Edson. I'll just reiterate that, we all know that one of the things we like about conferences is getting feedback on our work. So if you have thoughts or questions, please do let the presenters know either via the Q&A function in this BlueJeans app or via email or whatever other method of communication you prefer. I think I suspect the presenters would all appreciate that. With that, Edson, are you ready to present?
Yes. Can you see my slides?
I can still only see the BlueJeans app, unfortunately. Any other presenter can chime in if they see something different.
Yeah, I see the BlueJeans app, but it's frozen, but we can see your mouse moving around. If you can try minimizing it or maybe making the slides full screen and moving back and forth in case the screen is stuck. Can you minimize the BlueJeans?
Yes, I did.
You did. So now you see the slides on your screen?
Huh?
You see the slides on your screen, but...
Yes.
Okay. Can you try making them full screen and moving back and forth to see if that...
Yes, now I put not full screen and the BlueJeans is minimized.
That's weird. Okay. Maybe I will try sharing my screen, like we said, and if you can just let me know when to move back and forth, because for some reason it's not working. Can you all see the slides now?
No,
for a moment I did.
Yeah, for a moment I did too.
Huh.
Yeah, for a moment.
Now?
Oh, getting there.
It's a number of screens. One of them is the slides. Yeah.
Oh.
Okay.
Does this look right or still not quite?
Perfect.
Yes,
that looks good.
Okay, great.
Okay, this is a joint project with my colleague Karen Clay and then my co-author Josh Lewis from the University of Montreal and our postdoc Xiao Wang. Can you go to the next? So we are all familiar with influenza pandemics. I think the most well-known is in 1918, and here is just a picture of the Fort Riley Hospital in Kansas. And you can see how overwhelmed the infrastructure was, but also we are living through another pandemic. It's not influenza, but it's still a pandemic. You can see how the infrastructure can be overwhelmed. So pandemics pose significant threats to population health, and our question here is going to be to what extent does improved access to medical services mitigate the consequences? You can go to the next. So we are going to be looking here at public health insurance. So we're going to be leveraging the implementation of Medicaid in 65. So there are mixed evidence on the effects of Medicaid. So Curry and Grober and Goodman-Bacon have shown that infant and child mortality reduces. But on the other hand, Baker et al. And Finkelstein et al. Have showed that healthcare utilization might increase, but at least in the short run, there might be no changes in clinical measures or objective measures of health. And the empirical challenges are that the benefits of this great healthcare utilization may only emerge after a long period, or it can only materialize in periods of public health crisis. The research question here is going to be, does access to healthcare reduce the adverse effects of severe health shocks? And the empirical setting is going to be pretty much looking at the expansion of public insurance under the 1965 Medicaid program. And we're going to be leveraging the cross-state differences in eligibility based on the recipiency of AFDC. So everybody who was under AFDC now gets Medicaid. We are going to be looking at two severe influenza pandemics that occurred immediately before and after the program implementation. So we're looking at the 57-58 Asian flu pandemic and the 68-69 Hong Kong flu pandemic. And we're going to show that there's some geographical variation in pandemic severity due to some underlying county characteristics. So we combine this cross-state policy variation with cross-county differences in the underlying severity to estimate how Medicaid affect the pandemic-related infant mortality. Our focus is going to be infant mortality. So we're going to find significant heterogeneity in pandemic severity. There are some other studies showing that mortality increases in pandemic years in more polluted areas, including a paper of ours. And also mortality has been shown to increase, or everybody knows that where there's more population density, more mortality, more deaths happen as well. So the Medicaid implementation significantly offset the adverse effects of the 68-69 pandemic. It saved about 600 infant lives, and these benefits are relative to non-pandemic years. Now I'm going to give a very short background on the influenza pandemic. So there are three major pandemics in the 20th century, the 1918, and then these two that I mentioned, and there are some estimates that 12 to 17 since the 1700s. So the Asian flu pandemic in 57-58 started in Asia, and then it was the second wave that hit the U.S. in November. It killed 1.1 million worldwide and 116,000 people in the U.S. The 1968-69 pandemic hit in the U.S. in September of 68, and it killed 1 million people worldwide and 100,000 people in the U.S. Here's just a picture showing how infant mortality, was responding to these pandemic years. And you can see here deviations from trend, and it's pretty much during these two pandemics. So there's these spikes in the years of the pandemic. Next. So during the pandemics, as I said, there is wide differences in susceptibility and the progression of the disease. Some people experience minor symptoms, others have some complications like pneumonia, and the mortality happens primarily among infants, elderly, and pregnant women, which is different from coronavirus. Like pregnant women, it's not being shown to be affected. So the geographic variation in pandemic severity, we're going to be using a variation from air pollution, especially measured as coal-fired power plants or coal-fired power capacity in a county, and then of course urban density as the percent urban. And the access to medical care likely influences the pandemic mortality because vaccines were not developed until later. But on the other hand, intravenous antibiotics and fluids were actually effective treatment for pneumonia. Also, postnatal care right after birth, especially for low birth weight babies, was very important. Next. So in terms of Medicaid, it was part of the Social Security amendments of 65. It was established in 65. The goal was to improve medical access to the poor, and federal government would transfer money to the states and about 37 states implemented in 66, 67, and the others up to 1970. Only Arizona that we're going to be excluding because they implemented in 72. And the share of uninsured children fell from 40% by 40% from 63 to 68, so before and after implementation. And the Medicaid program mandate coverage for all recipients of federally funded welfare programs. The most prominent at this time was the AFDC. And as I said, Bacon has shown that Medicaid implementation reduced infant and child mortality. Next. So here's a map where we are showing in gray the states that have lower than lower than the median AFDC share in 1965, and the green ones are high AFDC based eligibility, and the ones with the stripes are the ones that implemented Medicaid up to 67, right before the pandemic. But as I said, the others were implementing in 68, 69, and 1970. So it's like widespread around the country. So the data is going to be annual county level infant mortality per 1,000 live births from 1950 to 79, and the modifiers of pandemic severity are going to be coal-fired electricity generating capacity and the percent urban. And the data from Medicaid we got from Bacon, the fraction of mothers eligible for AFDC in 65, and we have a bunch of controls. So this is the specification. We have the pandemic, a dummy for pandemic 57 and 58, and these modifiers, so we can understand them as more air pollution or more urban density affects the pandemic severity. And then we interact them with this high FDC for both 57 and 68, allowing, of course, these modifiers to be different in the post-65. We have county fixed effects, state by year. We have temperature, precipitation, other climate variables. And we include a number of differential trends based on the baseline characteristics, both economic, demographic, as I'll show in the table. Next slide. The identification assumption here is that we are going to be looking at within state variation in pandemic severity, and if there was no change because of Medicaid, so high and low FDC state would actually see exactly the same mortality. As I'm going to show in the next table, I'm going to potentially skip. There's no differential pre-trends across states based on AFDC eligibility, and we got the beta 3 here to be a placebo test because in 1957 the AFDC or the Medicaid proxy here, which is AFDC, high AFDC, is not is not implemented yet. So that's going to be a placebo test. Can you go next? Next 2 slides. The next one. So this is one of the main results in the paper, the previous one. Yes, so this is one of the main results in the paper. So we see that the pandemic of 57, 58, and 68, 69 are both the severity of the pandemic as measured as increasing infant mortality actually makes it worse. So it is more severe as we have shown in other papers. But as you can see, the high FDC eligibility for the pandemic of 57, 58 has a very low and non-significant effect. And for the 68, 69, it pretty much offsets the effect of the severity complicated by air pollution. So basically, air pollution makes the pandemic severity worse, but access to Medicaid actually completely offsets that effect. And as I said, the 57, 58 would be a placebo effect for us. So the effect is much smaller in magnitude and is statistically insignificant. We have the p-value for the test that these 2 coefficients, beta 3 and beta 4, would be equal, and we actually reject. It's not very, very strong, but it's like at 10%. The next slide shows similar effects, but looking at the modifier as percent urban. So I'm going to skip that for now, and the next slide because I'm almost out of time. Can you go? Yeah, the next one. I have a number of robustness checks, but I can respond in Q&A. The next slide. Yeah, so here is just to show that most of these effects actually came from mortality in day 1. So it's like really the care that was given by pregnant women that was giving birth, and probably there were complications in the delivery, and then having access to medical care made a huge difference. Go to the next slide, please. Another important thing is that AFDC, or Medicaid expansion, was primarily important for non-whites, and here we are showing that the effect of the offset effect of Medicaid was much stronger for non-whites. This is the interaction that we see on the fourth row, the coefficients minus 0.112 if you look at the co, and minus 0.062 for the percent urban. So they are stronger than they were for whites, which is the reference here. So next slide, and I'll wrap up. So just to conclude, so flu pandemics are important negative health shocks. They are particularly harmful in polluted areas and urban areas, and improved access to healthcare actually mitigates some of these consequences. And we show some evidence that this was important for neonatal mortality, potentially because they are caring for these very low birth weight babies. And this has implications for, the role of both prevention and medical response for pandemics, but also that these short-run studies of Medicaid could be underestimating the effects of access to healthcare or health insurance, because the benefits were not seen in the short run. It doesn't mean that they are not seen during public health crisis. Thank you. Sorry about the technical difficulties.
Thank you, Edson. There's me snapping. That's my version of everybody clapping for you. And don't worry about the technical difficulties at all. It happens to all of us. I'm not blaming you at all. It's 11:27. Next session starts in 3 minutes. If anybody has a question, I'm going to be here until 11:30. So now is the time to ask it, whether you're a presenter with a voice or an audience member that can type. Otherwise, in advance, let me just say thank you to all the attendees for showing up in the midst of this kind of different setup and compromised situation. And thanks to Daniel and Catie and Edson for sharing really cool research. And thank you, Theo, for moderating and helping us figure out how to do this thing.
I've got a quick question first, which is that do we all have to log out and stop at 11:30, or could we stay here and talk a little bit if we wanted?
Good question. I think we can stick around. I'm not. Theo might be the better person to answer it if he's still here, but I think even after we stop the broadcast, I was speaking with Catie before the broadcast began, so I think that's fine.
Yeah.
I unfortunately need to head out, but I would love to stay in contact about all of these papers by email.
Yeah, sure. That's too bad, Catie. I actually did. I had a quick question for you. If you'd like, I'll email to you though. If you've got to, get out. No, that's no problem.
No, I can stay on for a few minutes, just not for too long.
I just wanted to ask you a quick question, kind of about this result that you mentioned in your model about what happens if you endogenize prices. So I wondered if you could talk me a little through the intuition that's working in your model for that effect. So just to recall, if you let people know just how bad the pollution is, I would assume that if you endogenize prices, that means that for houses right next to a bad factory or something, prices are going to fall a lot. And
yes.
To me, it's a little intuitively unclear. If I'm a low-income person, now prices next to this horrible factory get, even lower. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? How does your model kind of operationalize the relationship between the value of a house and, it getting cheaper, and whether that's good news or bad news for a person?
Yeah. So, we've been working hard on this, and we welcome suggestions on it. So the house, and Sam should feel free to chime in if he has other ways to explain it better than me. So the house right next to the factory does get cheaper. In the way that we've endogenized prices, you're paying for distance, right? Um, in in our peer exchange economy, house prices are linear in distance. And so house prices fall right next to the factory, but they also fall far away. And the low income households were made of, yeah. The prices being wrong in the pre-period, if you want to call it that. I mean, there's not actually a time dimension, but the house prices being wrong under misinformation was helping far away households the most because they had bought so much distance. The prices had been distorted, and they had, because everybody's buying some amount of distance, that had helped high income households the most.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's, to me, the intuition there's not super clear, but of course that can be a good thing. So thanks.
Yeah, no, we started in the same place as you. In addition to the pure exchange economy where house prices are linear in distance, we also just model, well, what if there are two houses and two people? And what if trade does happen? What if trade doesn't happen? Sort of all the different scenarios that you could have in that 2x2 world. And you get the same intuition coming out of that too. And that's an appendix in the paper. I'm not going to try to talk through it off the top of my head.
I was just rereading our paper to try and remember what our response to that is. We acknowledge that. So the income of, when there's in this like two household model, there's a high income household and a low income household, and the shock, we didn't, it seems too complicated given what we were trying to achieve, to model the income shock from like a change in house prices when you realize that there's more pollution than you thought. And so I think part of the intuition is that, and that we're not including in our model, at least this time around.
Like the change in your household wealth because your asset value has changed, that's not in what we've done. And what we say is just in general equilibrium, anything could happen once you allow for sort of gentrification effects, which we haven't included.
Yeah, although I guess one reason that might be defensible a little bit is that low-income households are probably much more likely to rent. So exactly. If you put that channel in, right, so it would not really probably work against your result, right? So yeah, makes sense.
All right.
If we still have time, I had one other quick question for Edson.
Okay.
Not
sure.
Crowding out the other session on in the virtual world or anything here, which was simply that I think a good robustness test that could probably, I would be optimistic it would work really well for you, would be to exploit a lot of the other public policy rollouts that happened in the 1960s. So the 1960s, right, they were a big period. We had changes in a bunch of other programs, AFDC, food stamps, supplemental security income when under changes in that area. And to some extent, they were correlated with Medicaid. Obviously, Medicaid eligibility is connected with some of these programs, but there's actually some variation also. And I would think if you used these other programs, you should, they can be related to Medicaid. You could tell an argument we're getting food stamps is going to help somebody fight off the flu, So you might see something, but intuitively you should see weaker results if you do these other policies.
So we actually run one robustness checks where we include food stamp and Head Start and what was the other? Maybe the supplemental for pregnant mothers, pregnant women, I think, something like that. I don't remember the 3 other programs that we used. And in a horse race, when we include all of them, the effect comes from Medicaid, not from the other.
Yeah.
And this was something that we were like wrestling with because there are many papers showing those effects in infant health as well, right? So, and it doesn't seem the case, at least in a horse race. Like we don't know exactly if we were to find all the quasi-experimental evidence used in the literature, which we have been trying to get, so far we haven't, but that would be like a better answer, but at least in a horse race, it doesn't seem the case.
Cool, gotcha, cool.
But thanks, yeah.
Sure.
All right, I gotta go because I have a dental emergency and I have to go and see my dentist at noon. So
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Sorry to hear that, Edson. Yeah, thanks for presenting and sharing your work. So timely.
Yeah, really.
I know.
Thank you, everybody, for the questions and for sharing your stuff.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you to everybody. Nice to meet you, Daniel. And Edson, I've seen you before, so nice to see you.
Yes, nice
Yeah.
seeing you too. Nice seeing you
Great. All right, you guys. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.